My name is Margaret, and I'm 82 years old now. I've lived through wars, recessions, heartbreaks, and love stories that would put Hollywood to shame. But the story I'm about to tell you is one I've never shared before. Not with my children. Not with my grandchildren. Only now, in the quiet stillness of old age, do I have the courage to let it all out. It was the spring of 1961 when I first met James. I was just 22, working as a secretary at a small insurance firm in Ohio. Every day felt the same. Coffee at 8, typing by 9, lunch at noon, and home before dark. My world was small, predictable, and honestly, a little lonely. Then one morning, everything changed. James walked into the office with a box of files and a shy smile. Daddy. He was the new Geidel, lean with sandy brown hair and a calm voice that could make anyone feel at ease. He had this quiet charm, the kind you don't notice at first, but then can't stop thinking about. We started talking over coffee breaks and shared jokes about the boss's terrible toupee. Before long, we were having lunch together every day. He told me he was raised by adoptive parents in Pennsylvania and had moved to Ohio for a fresh start. Said he didn't know much about where he came from. I laughed and said, join the club. I was adopted too and never met my birth parents. It felt like we had something special right from the beginning. There was this unspoken understanding between us. We were both searching for something, maybe family, maybe love, maybe a place to belong. And somehow we found it in each other. I remember the exact moment I realized I was in love. We were walking through a park after work, the leaves just beginning to bud on the trees. James stopped, looked at me, and said, "You feel like home, Margaret?" My heart nearly stopped. No one had ever made me feel so safe, so seen. We dated for almost a year before he proposed. He took me to a small Italian restaurant downtown, nervously fumbling with the ring in his pocket. "I don't have much," he said, "but I want to spend the rest of my life with you." I said yes before. He even finished the sentence. We got married that June in a modest church, surrounded by close friends and a few distant relatives. My parents adored James. They said he had a good heart. And he did. He was gentle, dependable, and kind in ways that made me fall deeper in love every day. After the wedding, we bought a tiny house on the edge of town. We painted the kitchen yellow and planted tulips in the front yard. Life wasn't perfect. We struggled with money, work, and the usual ups and downs, but we were happy. Truly happy. Everyone used to joke about how similar we looked. Same eye color, same nose. Even our laugh was nearly identical. "You two must be soulmates," people would say. We'd laugh it off. I'd nudge him and tease. Maybe we're secretly related. And we'd both laugh, never knowing how close we were to the truth. But back then, nothing else mattered. We built a life side by side. James was the kind of man who rubbed my feet after a long day, who made breakfast on Sundays, who held my hand through every storm. We welcomed a beautiful children, Michael and Lauren. Life became a blur of school lunches, bedtime stories, and family vacations. Looking back now, it all seems like a dream. A beautiful, innocent dream. I had no idea that the man I loved with all my heart, the man who fathered my children and shared my every joy, was more than just my husband. He was something I never could have imagined, something I wouldn't discover until decades later, when it was far too late to undo. But I need you to understand something before I go on. I didn't know. Neither of us did. What we had was real. It was honest, was built on love, not secrets. And for a long time, it was enough. This is how it started, with a coffee break, a few laughs, a shared past we didn't know we shared, and a love story that would change everything. Looking back, it's strange how much James and I never asked. We were so in love, so eager to start our lives together that we barely questioned where we came from. Maybe it was easier that way, pretending the past didn't matter. But eventually, the past always finds a way to knock on your door, no matter how tightly it's locked. I had always known I was adopted. My parents never hid it from me. They used to say things like, "We chose you. or you were a special gift. I believed them, and I was grateful. They were kind, responsible people, simple folks who did their best. But there was always a silence in our home when I asked about where I came from. A discomfort, as if they were afraid that if I knew too much, I might go looking for something or someone. James had a similar story. He told me his adoptive parents took him in when he was about a year old. He didn't remember anything before that. He had no siblings, no birth records, just a brief explanation that his biological parents couldn't care for him. That was it. He never talked much about it, and I never pushed Dot in some twisted way. Our shared mystery brought us closer. We used to joke that we were orphans of the world, like two lost puzzle pieces that finally found their match. There was comfort in the fact that neither of us had roots. We felt free, no baggage, no judgment, just a clean slate. But every so often, little things would creep into details we couldn't explain. Once, I remember James looking through some old boxes in our attic. He found a small teddy bear with a stitched M on the paw. He held it up and said, "That's strange. I had one just like this when I was a baby." I froze, because that bear, it wasn't his, it was mine. My adoptive mother had saved it from when I was a toddler. I brushed it off and said, I guess all kids' toys looked the same back then. We laughed and moved on. But something inside me felt unsettled. Another time, we were visiting his adoptive parent suite, older folks named Helen and Thomas. His mother was showing me some old baby pictures of James. One of them had a strange mark on his left shoulder, a small birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. I blinked. My heart skipped. I had the exact same mark. Same shape, same spot. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to ruin a perfectly nice afternoon over something so small, so impossible. As time passed, those little coincidences started piling up. The way we both had a fear of swimming. The identical way we held a pen. The strange craving we both had for pickled onions, something neither of our adoptive families liked. Still, I pushed it all down. Told myself that love is built on trust, not blood. I believed the universe was just playing its little games. I didn't want to know more. I didn't want to go digging where peace might be buried, but James was different. He started asking questions, not just about himself, but about me too. He wondered if maybe we'd met before, long ago. Maybe our parents had known each other. He even once asked if I'd ever considered doing one of those ancestry searches. I laughed it off. What for? So we can learn we're distantly related to some king from the 1600s. But deep down, I was afraid. Terrified, actually, because I knew somewhere in my gut that if we went looking, we'd find something we didn't want. To find there's this strange comfort in not knowing, in believing that your life is exactly what it appears to be. But the truth has sharp edges, and the longer you ignore it, the deeper it cuts when it finally catches up to you. James never pressured me. He respected my silence, but I could tell it bothered him not knowing. He wanted roots. He wanted history. I just wanted peace. Years passed. Our children grew. We moved houses. We aged together. And the questions faded into the background of everyday life. But every once in a while at night, when the house was quiet and the world felt still, I'd lie awake and wonder, who were we before we met? And what if the answer was something we couldn't bear? I suppose part of me always knew there was a connection deeper than love, something primal, something blood deep. But when you're in love, truly in love, you don't stop to ask the kinds of questions that might destroy everything you've built. You just keep going, keep smiling, pretending the silence in your story is just a page that never got written, until one day you find that page, and it's been written all along. I've lived a long life. But if I could choose just one day to relive, just one night would be the day I married James. It was June 24th, 1962. I was 23. And James had just turned 25. It was one of those perfect summer mornings, the kind where the sky looks like it's been freshly painted. And even the birds sound like they're singing just for you. Everything about that day felt magical. We didn't have much. No grand hall, no fancy dress, no towering cake, just a small ceremony. At St. Paul's Church in our little town, surrounded by the people who mattered most. My mother gave me her old lace gown, and I spent the night before gently sewing a loose hem by hand. My heart fluttering the whole time. James looked so handsome that morning. He wore a gray suit we'd picked out together from a secondhand shop, and he had this nervous smile that melted me on the spot. I remember how he kept fidgeting with his tie, and how his best man, his childhood friend Carl, kept teasing him for looking like he was about to faint. But when I stepped into the church, everything and everyone else disappeared. It was just James and me. There was this moment right before the music started when our eyes locked. He mouthed, "You're beautiful," and I swear the whole world went still. I'd never felt so loved, so certain, so safe. The ceremony was simple, sweet. I still remember the pastor's voice as he read from Corinthians. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. We held hands through every word, and when it came time for our vows, James looked straight into my eyes and said, "Margaret, I may not know where I came from, but I know I was meant to find you." Tears ran down my cheeks before I could even respond. My voice trembled as I said, "And I'll stand by you wherever life takes us." When the pastor pronounced us husband and wife, James kissed me so tenderly that the whole church erupted in cheers. Even my father, who rarely showed emotion, was wiping tears from his eyes. It was the happiest I had ever seen my parents end. Me, I was glowing. The reception was held in the church basement. There were mismatched chairs and punch-in plastic cups, and my aunt made her famous lemon bars. Someone brought a record player, and we danced to an old Sinatra tune. Our first dance wasn't choreographed or graceful. It was silly and clumsy, and we laughed the whole time. I stepped on his toes twice, and he spun me anyway, like I was a princess in a ballroom. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the life I want. Just him and me, laughter and lemon bars. One moment stands out more than the rest. Near the end of the night, James and I snuck out the back door, escaping the noise and heat. We sat under the big oak tree behind the church, my head resting on his shoulder. Fireflies blinked in the dark like tiny stars come down to visit us. "Do you ever think about who your real parents were?" I asked him quietly. "Sometimes," he said, "but not today. Today, this is what's real. This is all I need." I smiled and kissed his cheek, never realizing how close that question came to unraveling everything. We left that night hand in hand, dragging tin cans tied to the back of James's beat-up old truck, "Just married" scribbled across the back window in white paint. People honked and waved as we drove off. Two kids with no map and nothing but love in their pockets. We moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the south side of town. It had peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, and a kitchen barely big enough for two, but it was ours. Hey! We painted the walls in soft yellow, the color of sunlight. We bought a small dining table from a thrift store and danced around it every night like it was a grand ballroom. Those first few months of marriage were the sweetest days of my life, waking up next to James, cooking dinner together, building a future brick by brick. There was no hint of the storm waiting for us on the horizon. Just love. Pure and uncomplicated. I kept a journal back then, pages filled with little memories. Pressed flower petals, movie stubs, grocery lists that turned into love notes. I called him my miracle. I wrote that our souls must have known each other before we ever met. That we were meant to find each other, no matter how far apart we started. And in a way, I wasn't wrong. We were connected. But not just by fate, or love by blood by a truth too terrible to imagine, but that day, our wedding day that was before the shadows, before the questions, before the ache of what we didn't know. It was the happiest day of my life. And that's what makes it so hard to remember now. Asterisk, the first few years of marriage were a blur of simple joys and quiet beginnings. James and I didn't have much, but we had each other. And in those early days, felt like more than enough. We both worked. He took a job at a local manufacturing plant, and I continued at the insurance office until I got pregnant. We lived in that tiny, yellow-walled apartment for 3 years before we scraped together enough to buy a little house on Oakwood Lane, a poor. But it had a yard, 2 bedrooms, and a porch that caught the morning sun just right. We spent every weekend painting, sanding, and planting flowers. James built our first kitchen table by hand-crooked legs, and Al and I made blue gingham curtains for the windows. We were building a life from the ground up, and we were proud of every inch. Then came Michael, the day I found out I was pregnant. Was one of the most emotional days of my life. I remember standing in our tiny bathroom, staring at that test in disbelief, and calling James at work. He came rushing home so fast he forgot to clock out. When I opened the door, he was breathless and grinning like a boy who'd just won a prize. He dropped to his knees, kissed my belly, and whispered, "You're going to be an amazing mother." Pregnancy wasn't easy. Was sick most mornings, and tired all the time, but James never let me lift a finger. He read baby books at night and practiced diapering a stuffed rabbit just to make me laugh. We picked names, painted the nursery pale green, and argued lovingly about whether we'd raise our child with bedtime prayers or bedtime stories. We settled on both. Michael was born on a chilly October morning. He had a full head of dark hair and his father's deep brown eyes. The moment the nurse placed him in my arms, I felt something shift inside me, like my heart had grown 10 times bigger. James cried, holding us both, whispering, "He's perfect, just like you." Watching James become a father was one of the greatest gifts of my life. He was patient, gentle, and silly in the best way. He'd rock Michael to sleep singing off-key lullabies and stay up all night during fevers without a single complaint. He wasn't just helping, he was present in every moment. 2 years later, we welcomed Laura. She came into the world screaming and never stopped letting us know what she wanted. She was fierce and curious from the beginning. James used to call her his little lion. Oh, how she adored her daddy. She'd wait by the door every day until he got home from work, then run into his arms with that squeal that only little girls have. We were happy. God, we were happy. Our house was full of life finger paints on the walls, toys underfoot, crayon, drawings on the fridge. We weren't perfect parents, but we tried our best. We took the kids to church on Sundays, to the park in the afternoons, and for ice cream when the budget allowed. I remember thinking, this is it, this is the dream, but even in those perfect years, the past had a way of whispering to us. One evening, when Laura was about 4, she came up to me and said, "Mommy, why do Daddy and I have the same toes?" I looked down and she was right. It's that same little bend in the pinky toe. The same shape. Startled me more than it should have. I laughed it off and said, "I guess you take after your dad," but my stomach turned. There were other moments, like that. Subtle, quiet, like when Michael brought home a family tree project from school and asked where his grandparents came from. James and I just looked at each other blank. He drew a tree with empty branches, and my heart broke just a little. We always told the kids they were loved. That's what mattered most, right? But I'd be lying if I said I never wondered where our branches began, what roots we passed on, what stories lived in our blood. Still, those questions were easy to ignore in the chaos of daily life. Between school drop-offs, work, laundry, and scraped knees, the silence of our past faded into background noise. James and I made time for each other when we could. Saturday nights after the kids were asleep, we'd sit on the porch with mugs of tea and talk about nothing and everything. He once said, "If I die tomorrow, I'll have no regrets because I got to live this life with you." And I believed him. I felt the same. We had love. Real love. We made a family out of thin air, stitched it together with laughter and bedtime songs, and made it strong enough to weather any storm. Or so I thought. Because no matter how perfect things seem, some truths lie waiting in the shadows, and when they come to light, they don't knock, they shatter. It's strange how the past can lie hidden in the dustiest corners of your home waiting, watching, biding its time until one innocent moment cracks everything wide open. It was early spring, and I had decided to do a bit of cleaning in the attic. You know, the kind digging through forgotten boxes, tossing out things we no longer needed. The kids were grown by then, off at college, and James was in the garage tinkering with an old radio. We were entering a quiet season of life, and I thought it might be time to finally declutter. I never imagined that a simple cardboard box would change everything. It was one of those plain, weathered storage boxes with no label, tucked behind some Christmas decorations and a broken lamp. I pulled it out, sneezing at the dust cloud that followed. Opened it, expecting old photo frames or maybe school papers from the kids. But what I found stopped me cold. Inside were a few neatly folded documents, some birth certificates, adoption forms, and a small envelope with my name written on it in faded ink. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The envelope was yellowed with age on the back was a seal I didn't recognize, just a faint stamp from a county in Pennsylvania. I opened it slowly, my heart beating faster with every second. It was a letter from a woman named Helen Cartwright, dated 1940. It began with the words, "To my daughter Margaret. I hope someday you'll read this and understand." I didn't breathe. I sat down on an old crate and read every word with shaking hands. The letter explained that she had given me up for adoption when I was just a few months old. She had been young, unmarried, and desperate. Her family sent her away to a home for unwed mothers, where I was born and quickly placed into care. But that wasn't the part that made me feel like the air had been knocked from my lungs. Halfway through the letter, she wrote, "You had a twin brother. I held you both for the first and only time before we were separated. I wanted to keep you together, but they told me it wasn't possible. I've lived with that pain every day." A twin brother. I dropped the letter onto my lap and sat in silence. For what felt like forever, 1,000 thoughts ran through my mind all at once. I had a brother, a twin, out there in the world, somewhere, and then that sick feeling in my stomach. That whisper in my ear, what if it was James? I stood up, dizzy, trying to breathe. It couldn't be. It couldn't. But even as I denied it to myself, pieces of the puzzle started sliding into place in my head, whether I wanted them to or not. The matching birthmarks, the same eyes, the way we laughed, the same. How people always said we looked alike, the teddy bear. The crescent scar. I wanted to scream. I forced myself to keep digging. I read the adoption forms, mine and James's, and while they were from different agencies, both were dated within the same 2-week span. Both listed the same birth county. Both used similar coded case numbers. I ran downstairs with the papers. In my hands, heart pounding like a drum in my chest, James was still in the garage, elbow deep in that old radio. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know how to think. So I didn't say anything. Not that night, not the next day. I placed the documents in a drawer and locked them away. I told myself it was a coincidence. That it had to be. That there was no way fate could be so cruel, so twisted. But denial is a fragile thing. It only takes the lightest touch for it to crumble. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing everything differently. The way James walked, the curve of his smile, his stories about his childhood, his earliest memory being from a house that sounded eerily like the one in the letter. His old questions about his past, the ones I always brushed off. Now they haunted me. I began to avoid him, pulling away from his touch. Lying awake at night, pretending to sleep, turning my face when he leaned in for a kiss. He noticed, of course. He asked me what was wrong. I lied over and over again. "I'm just tired. It's nothing. Just hormones." But the weight of the truth was growing heavier by the hour. I started having dreams, vivid, strange ones. I saw two infants in a hospital crib, side by side, a woman sobbing as she was led away. Oh. I woke up one night drenched in sweat, heart racing. James reached out to me in the dark, and I recoiled without even thinking. That's when I knew I couldn't run from it anymore. The box, the letter, the records, the birthmark, all of it. I had to find out the truth even if it meant destroying the life we had built together, because somewhere deep inside me, I already knew. And once you start putting the pieces together, there's no way to pretend the puzzle doesn't exist. Asterisk, for weeks after finding that box, I lived in a fog, the letter, the dates, the mention of a twin. It played in my head over and over again like a record stuck on the worst part of a song. And James, my husband, the father of my children, the man I'd loved for more than 30 years, was starting to notice that I was unraveling. I stopped cooking. I stopped sleeping. I'd sit at the kitchen table staring at those documents, unable to look away, as if by sheer will I could change the words on the page. At first I told myself I was being ridiculous. I thought, what are the odds? How could it even be possible? James and I had lived full lives together. Children, birthdays, anniversaries, vacations. We were happy. Surely the universe couldn't be that cruel. Surely this was all some weird mistake, a string of coincidences masquerading as something more. But the doubt never left. And eventually, doubt turns into obsession. So I started digging. I went to the county office and requested copies of my original birth certificate. It wasn't easy. Adoption laws back then were different. So many records were sealed or partially redacted. I told the woman behind the counter that I was looking for answers about my health, which wasn't a total lie. She handed me a copy and gave me a sympathetic smile. Margaret Cartwright, born June 3, 1940. Mother, Helen Cartwright. Father, not listed. Then I requested James's birth certificate, claiming I was collecting documents for a family archive. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't question me. When I saw his certificate, my hands went ice cold. James Cartwright. Born June 3, 1940. Mother, Helen Cartwright. Father, not listed. My breath caught in my throat. The same date, the same mother. Same hospital. I remember the paper trembling in my hands, the world spinning around me. The proof was right there, staring back at me like a ghost from a nightmare. I ran to the car, slammed the door shut, and screamed. A sound I didn't know I was capable. I've escaped my mouth something between grief and madness. He was my brother, my twin brother. I had kissed him, loved him, built a family with him, lived every day of my adult life next to someone I was bound to by blood. I felt sick. I was sweating. I couldn't drive. I just sat there in that parking lot, gripping the steering wheel, shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to burn the papers, throw them into the wind, erase the truth with fire. But the truth once known can't be undone. The next week, I contacted a private genealogy researcher. I didn't tell her the whole story, just enough to justify the urgency. I gave her our names, birth dates, and adoption details. She promised to run DNA comparisons and trace any possible links. I spent that week moving through life like a ghost. James noticed, of course. He asked me one night, "Are you angry with me? Did I do something wrong?" I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to scream it into the night. But instead, I shook my head and lied. It's nothing. I think I'm just going through something. And in a way, I was. I was mourning the life I thought we had. When the DNA results came in, I locked myself in the bathroom to read them. 99.9% match. Full siblings, twins, there it was in cold clinical print. The truth that no prayer, no hope, no denial could erase. I sat on the floor for hours, staring at the results. I don't even remember if I cried. It was like I'd fallen into a deep, silent abyss. The kind of sorrow you can't scream through because the weight of it has crushed your voice. I kept hearing my mother's words in the letter. I've lived with that pain every day. Now it was my turn. I wanted someone to blame my birth mother, the system, the adoption agency, God. But in the end, what difference would it make? The damage was done. The truth had already been living in my home for decades, wrapped in the skin of the man I loved. My brother, my husband. I don't know what hurt more, the horror of what we unknowingly became, or the memory of how beautiful our life had once been. I thought about our wedding, our children's births, all the kisses, the laughter, the quiet nights holding each other close. Was it all a lie? Or was it something more complicated than right and wrong could ever define? I knew I had to tell him. I couldn't carry this secret alone. But how do you look into the eyes of the man you love and tell him he's your brother? How do you rip someone's world apart with words? I didn't know how. Still don't. But what I did know, in that moment alone, with a DNA test in my trembling hands, was that my life, my marriage, my identity had shattered, and there was no putting the pieces back together without cutting myself on every edge. There are days in a person's life that carve a deep, permanent scar into the soul. Days you don't just remember, you relive. Every breath, every sound, every aching second. For me, that day came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The sun was shining. James was in the kitchen, humming some old tune as he washed the dishes. It could have been any ordinary day. But I had been carrying the truth in my chest like a ticking bomb. And I just knew it was going to explode. I had tried to find the right words over and over again. I practiced in the mirror. I rehearsed it in my sleep, but there's no script for a moment like that. Nothing prepares you for telling the man you love. It's that he's your blood. I stood in the doorway, clutching the DNA results in one hand and the letter from my birth mother in the other. My palms were sweating. My legs felt like they might give out. James looked up from the sink and smiled at me like he always did. "Hey, honey, you all right? You've been quiet all day." That smile broke me. I sat down at the kitchen table and motioned for him to join me. He dried his hands on a dish towel and came over, concerned now. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "I need to tell you something," I said. My voice was barely above a whisper. "And I need you to just listen, please." He nodded slowly. I could see his mind racing already. Maybe he thought I was sick. Maybe he thought I was leaving him. But the truth was so much worse than either of those things. I placed the letter and the DNA report on the table in front of him. He glanced down, confused. He picked up the letter and started reading. His eyes scanned the paper, and I saw the color drain from his face. Then he picked up the DNA report, his hands trembling now. Silence, heavy and suffocating. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, horrified. This can't be real," he said. "I wish it weren't." He stood up suddenly, pushing his chair back so hard it screeched against the tile. He paced the room, one hand in his hair, the other still gripping the paper. No. This is some kind of mistake. Prank? Some twisted coincidence." "I checked everything," I said, choking on my own words. "The birth certificates, the dates, the DNA. The woman who gave me up. She gave you up too. We're twins, James." He stopped pacing. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. Then he collapsed into the chair across from me, burying his face in his hands. I wanted to reach out to him to comfort him, but how could I? What do you do when the lines between love and family blur into something unnatural, something forbidden? "I don't understand," he said, his voice cracked and broken. We didn't know. I nodded, tears pouring down my cheeks. "No, we didn't. But we do now." He looked up at me, and I'll never forget the look in his eyes, utter devastation. A man who had just watched his entire life unravel. "What does this mean? What are we supposed to do?" "I don't know," I said. "I don't know what the rules are for something like this. I only know that I love you. I've always loved you." He stared at me, then dropped his gaze to the table. But what does that love mean now? And that was the question neither of us could answer. We sat in silence for what felt like hours. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking, the hum of the refrigerator, the birds chirping outside every sound. Felt too loud, too normal in the face of something so monstrously wrong. James eventually stood up and walked outside without saying a word. He stood on the porch, staring out at the street. I watched him through the window. The man I had shared my bed with for over 30 years. The man who held my hand through childbirth, who built our home with his bare hands, who made me feel safe in a world that had always felt uncertain. Now, suddenly, he felt like a stranger, and yet not. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did he. We lay in the same bed, backs turned, breathing in silence. Our bodies close, but a chasm had opened between us that no words could cross. We were still husband and wife on paper. But in our hearts, something had been shattered. Something innocent. Something sacred. We had broken every rule without ever knowing. And now we had to decide, what comes next? Because once you know the truth, once the veil is lifted, there's no going back to ignorance, only forward. Into a darkness you never imagined you'd face together. James was never the kind of man to raise his voice. Even in the most difficult moments of our marriage, he stayed calm, steady like a stone in a river. That's one of the reasons I loved him so deeply. He was my anchor, my safe place. But after I told him the truth, something in him changed. For days we barely spoke. We moved through the house like strangers. I'd pass him in the hallway and his eyes would drop to the floor. We still shared meals in silence. We still slept in the same bed, though neither of us slept much at all. It was like mourning a death while the person you're grieving is still sitting across from you. On the fourth day, James finally spoke. We were sitting on the porch, side by side, watching the wind ripple through the trees. He cleared his throat and said quietly, "Do you remember the night we painted this porch?" I nodded slowly. Of course I remembered. We'd gotten into a playful fight over paint colors. I wanted seafoam green. He wanted slate blue. We compromised with a mix that turned out hideous sand. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. That night, he said, was one of the best nights of my life. I turned to look at him, and tears were already forming in his eyes. I keep thinking about all the moments we've shared, he continued. Every anniversary, every birthday, every time Laura ran into my arms or Michael called me Super Dad. All of it. It was real, wasn't it? Yes, I whispered. It was all real. He nodded slowly, but there was a heaviness in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Then why does it feel like it's all been ripped away? I didn't have an answer. He stood up suddenly, as if something had been building in him and finally cracked. I didn't ask for this, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know. None of this is our fault. We were just two kids trying to find love. We did. I walked over and placed a hand on his arm, but he flinched just slightly and I pulled away. That moment shattered me more than anything else. It was the first time in over 30 years that he recoiled from my touch. What do we do now? I asked, voice trembling. What does this mean for us? James stared out at the trees for a long time. I don't know, he said. But I can't pretend nothing's changed. Neither could I. He walked back inside and I followed him. We sat down at the kitchen. Table the same one where we used to share morning coffee, where our children once did homework, where we had laughed and cried over so many seasons of life. James ran his fingers through his hair, a nervous habit he only did when he was truly overwhelmed. We have to talk about the kids, he said. Do we tell them? The thought made my stomach turn. Michael and Laura were adults now. They had their own lives, their own families. What would this truth do to them? Would it ruin their memories of childhood? Would it destroy the way they saw us? They deserve to know, James said softly. But maybe not yet. We sat in silence again. There was so much to say, and yet nothing that could be said to make sense of any of it. Finally, he looked at me. Really looked at me. And for a moment, I saw my husband again, not the stranger, not the brother, but the man I had loved with my whole heart. Do you regret it? He asked. All of it. I felt my chest tighten. I had asked myself that question every night since the truth came out. And every night I gave myself the same answer. No, I said. I don't regret loving you. I regret not knowing. But I don't regret us. Not for a second. James let out a shaky breath, his eyes misting. He reached across the table and gently took my hand. For a moment, the warmth between us returned. Familiar, comforting, painful. But where do we go from here? I asked, barely holding back tears. I don't know, he replied. But I think we need help. Therapy, guidance, something, because this is bigger than us. And if we're going to survive it, we can't do it alone. I nodded. It was the first time I'd felt any clarity since everything came crashing down that night. We slept in the same bed, but this time we held each other. Not like lovers, not even like friends, but like two people trying to survive the same storm. James wept quietly into my shoulder, and I wept into the silence. Because love doesn't just vanish when truth arrives. It changes, it bruises, but sometimes still lingers, even in the ruins. Of all the thoughts that tore through my mind in those long, silent nights after the truth came out, the one that haunted me most was this. What about Michael and Laura? What would they think if they knew? What would they feel? Anger, disgust, betrayal, pity. The weight of this secret wasn't just mine and James's to carry anymore. Our children were part of this story, even if they had no idea. And that, perhaps, was the cruelest part of all. We had raised them with love. Honest, devoted, unconditional love. We kissed their scraped knees, cheered at their school plays, cried at their graduations. Every bedtime story, every packed lunch, every moment of their childhood was built on the foundation James and I created. Together. But what if that foundation had always been cracked? I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at an old photo of the four of us at the beach, Michael building a sandcastle, Laura clutching her favorite stuffed bear, James and I smiling like the world was perfect. Back then, it was perfect. Or at least it felt that way. How do you explain to your children that the very love that brought them into the world was a mistake? Or worse, something that could never have happened, should never have happened, if we had only known? James and I talked about it for days, at the dinner table, in the car, on walks. Every conversation eventually circled back to the same impossible question. Do we tell them? I think they have a right to know, James said one night. They're adults. They can handle it. But can they? I asked, what if it breaks them? What if it changes the way they look at us forever? Maybe it should, he whispered. And then, after a pause, maybe it already has. I knew what he meant. We had already begun to drift into something new. Not lovers, not quite siblings, something in between. Something unnameable. And if we could barely understand it? Could they? There was also the fear, deep and unspoken, that our children might not be okay. Not medically, not genetically. We had shared the same blood. James and I, what if there were consequences we didn't see? What if our love had hurt them in ways we never realized? Okay. We scheduled genetic testing in secret. Not for ourselves, we already knew. But for Michael and Laura, we couldn't explain the real reason to them, so we lied. We told them we were doing a health screening for ancestry purposes. That we were just curious about potential hereditary conditions. They didn't question it. And thank God, the results came back clear. No anomalies. No signs of risk. Our babies, our precious children, were healthy. But that didn't ease the ache in my chest, because health was only part of the story. Truth was the other. I'd sit at the kitchen table and imagine the moment. Laura clutching her coffee, Michael frowning in confusion. Me trembling, trying to find the words. Your father and I? We didn't know. We were just children ourselves. It was a mistake. But also, it wasn't. Because it gave us you. Would they understand? Or did they recoil? Like we were something dirty, something unnatural. I imagined Laura's tears, Michael's anger, the silence that might follow, the phone calls that might stop, the grandchildren we might never see again. And I imagined them telling their children, our grandchildren, that Grandma and Grandpa had done something terrible, that we were something to be ashamed of. That thought nearly destroyed me, but so did the silence, because the longer we waited, the heavier the secret became. And secrets have a way of festering, of seeping into cracks until they burst open. James and I made a pact. We wouldn't tell them, not yet, maybe not ever. We would carry the truth together, in quiet shame, if that's what it took to protect the people we loved most. We would preserve their memories, their innocence, their understanding of the world. We told ourselves we were doing it for them, but part of me wonders if we were also doing it for us, because once you speak a truth like that out loud, it's real. It lives in the air, changes everything. So we smiled when they called. We hugged them at birthdays, kept the mask on. And every time Laura kissed her father's cheek, every time Michael said, "I love you, Mom," I felt like I was living in a dream I didn't deserve. But I also felt something else. Gratitude, because even if the love James and I shared was born from something unknowable, it gave us something beautiful, Michael. Laura, they were our miracle. And maybe, just maybe, that miracle was enough to justify all the pain that followed. Living with the truth was like living with a ghost. It was always there in the room, in the silence, in the space between our glances, but never spoken aloud. James and I became masters of pretending. We smiled when we had to. We laughed when people were watching, but inside, we were grieving. Not for someone who had died, but for us, for the people we used to be. After we made the decision not to tell Michael and Laura, life returned to a kind of rhythm. Holidays came and went. We still hosted Thanksgiving. We still decorated the tree at Christmas. But everything felt just a little bit quieter, a little more hollow. James changed. He became withdrawn. He spent more time in the garage fixing things that didn't need fixing. He started going on long walks alone. He stopped kissing me goodnight, and I didn't blame him. How could I? Our love had transformed into something neither of us could fully understand. We were no longer just husband and wife. We were siblings, twins. That knowledge sat between us like a wall, made of glass, transparent but impossible to ignore. Some nights, I'd lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside me. I'd remember the nights when we made love, when we whispered dreams into each other's ears, when he'd pull me close and say, "You're my everything." Now we barely touched. We didn't know how. Was it wrong to still love him? I asked myself that question every single day. My heart still beat for him, still cared for him. I still saw his kindness in the way he opened the door for me, or how he remembered how I liked my tea. But love no longer felt innocent. It was layered now with guilt, confusion, sorrow. We tried therapy, just once. We found a counselor in a nearby town, someone who specialized in unusual family dynamics. We didn't give her the full story right away. We called it an identity issue. But when we finally told her the truth, her eyes widened and her voice dropped too. A whisper. She didn't judge us. I think that's what we feared the most. But even with her help, there was no roadmap for what we were going through. No chapter in the marriage books that says what to do when you find out your spouse is your twin. We continued therapy for a few weeks, but eventually we stopped going. The questions didn't have answers, and the answers didn't bring peace. Instead, we fell into silence again. I found comfort in small routines, watering the garden, knitting blankets I'd never give away, baking pies that I wouldn't eat. I filled the spaces with tasks. Because the silence between James and me had become unbearable. Sometimes we'd sit across from each other at dinner and exchange a glance, a look that said, "How did we get here?" And yet we stayed. Neither of us walked away. We made a quiet decision to grow old together, not as lovers anymore, but as companions, co-survivors of a truth too painful to share with the world. We celebrated our 50th anniversary with a small dinner. It's just us, the kids and the grandkids. Laura made a slideshow of old photos, sus as newlyweds, James holding baby Michael, me laughing on a picnic blanket. Everyone clapped and cried, but James and I just sat there, holding hands under the table. 1,000 memories flashing before our eyes like ghosts after they all left. We sat by the fireplace with glasses of wine and watched the flames dance. "You think they'll ever find out?" he asked softly. "Maybe," I said, "but I hope not." "Do you think we did the right thing?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Thought about it for a long time. I think I said slowly that we did the best we could with the truth we were given. He nodded, then leaned in and kissed my forehead. It wasn't romantic. It was reverent. There was love in a different kind. One shaped by tragedy, forged in silence, wrapped in something far more complex than anyone could understand. That kiss was our way of saying, "I forgive you. I still love you. And I'm still here." And that was all we had left. Time passed. We grew older. Slower. More fragile. But the secret remained between us like an old wound, one that no longer bled, but never fully healed. Sometimes I wonder what our life would have been like if we had known the truth from the beginning. Would we have turned away from each other? Would we have missed out on the love we shared? And the family we created? Would I choose differently if I could go back? I honestly don't know. Because even in the pain, even in the shame, I know this much. James was the love of my life. And even if the world would never understand, I will always be grateful for every day I got to spend by his side. When you reach your 80s, you start to feel the weight of time in a different way. Your bones ache more. Your breath shortens. Your memories become louder than your footsteps. You begin to realize just how much you've carried in silence and how heavy it has become for years. I told myself I'd take this secret to my grave. I'd bury it with me, wrap it in flowers, and let it rot quietly beneath the earth. But something changed in me as the years passed. Maybe it was watching James age slower than me, but still slipping. Maybe it was the way my fingers trembled a little more each day. Or maybe it was the look in my granddaughter's eyes when she asked, "Grandma, how did you and Grandpa fall?" In love. I smiled at her. I told her the story I always told, how we met at work, how we fell in love over coffee and long walks, how he proposed under the stars. And it wasn't a lie. Not exactly. But it wasn't the whole truth either. And that's the part I can't die with. Because the silence is no longer kind. It's become a burden. It whispers to me at night. It follows me through the house. It stares at me from picture frames. James, and I don't speak of it anymore. We haven't in years. But the silence between us is full of knowing, of memory, of shared sorrow. He still holds my hand on the porch, still brushes my hair back behind my ear on hard days. He still looks at me the same way he always did, with love. But it's a different kind of love now, one that aches, one that forgives. I started writing everything down in a journal, not for attention, not for drama, but in case someone finds it after I'm gone. In case Michael or Laura or even one of the grandchildren needs to understand who I really was, because I don't. Want them to find out from a stray document or an old letter tucked away in a box. I want them to hear it from my, even if my voice is no longer around to say it. And if someone does read this someday, I hope they'll understand. We didn't know. We truly didn't know. And once we did, we stayed quiet, not out of shame, but out of love. We wanted to protect what was left. We wanted to protect them. But part of me wonders, did we do more harm by staying silent? I don't know. There are no rules for this kind of story. No guidebook. No clean ending. Only questions that never quite get answered. I've started sorting through boxes in the attic again. The same attic, where I found the truth so many years ago. There are baby shoes, letters, old photos of James holding the children. There's a wedding album with a dried flower tucked inside. Faded and brittle. I look at those pictures and I don't see incest. I don't see scandal. I see love. Flawed, tragic. Real love. If someone reads this someday and feels disgusted, I understand. If they feel anger, I accept it. If they feel pity, so be it. But I hope more than anything they feel something else. Compassion. Because life isn't as clean and clear as we'd like to believe. Sometimes love finds you in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong way. And yet, it still feels right. And you build a life on that feeling. You raise children. You celebrate milestones. You make each other better people. And then one day, you find out the truth. And you're left holding a shattered picture of everything you thought was real. But you don't stop loving. You can't stop loving. And that, suppose, is what this story really is. Not just about secrets or mistakes or fate's cruel joke, but about love. Enduring, complicated, unexplainable. Love. So if you're reading this, whoever you are, know that I was a woman who made peace with a painful truth. Who chose love, even when it hurt. Who lived a life full of laughter and tears and moments that mattered, even if they were born of something unimaginable. I am Margaret. I was a wife, a mother, a sister, a grandmother, and I hope a human being worthy of forgiveness, because I can feel the end drawing near. The quiet is getting louder. And before I go, I needed someone to know. To really know. This is my story. And now, it's yours to. Now that I've said everything. Now that the silence has finally been broken, I find myself sitting in this quiet house asking one final question. Did I live a lie? Or did I just love the wrong way? It's a question that doesn't have a clean answer. Some would say both. Others might say neither. But for me, the truth lies somewhere in between. When I think about the years James and I spent together, I don't feel deception. I don't feel filth or shame. I feel warmth. I feel the memory of a man who brought me joy, who danced with me in the kitchen, who held our children with tears in his eyes the first time they said, "Daddy." That wasn't a lie. It couldn't have been. We didn't know the truth until it was far too late. And once we did, we didn't destroy what we had. We honored it. We carried it. We adapted to the unimaginable. That's not cowardice. That's survival. The world doesn't give us perfect stories. It gives us messy ones, complicated ones, ones that leave scars on the soul. And this was ours. Sometimes when I watch the rain fall outside my window, I wonder what life would have been if we had never met. If I had taken a different job, moved to a different town, if fate had shown mercy and kept us apart. But then I think of Michael's smile, Laura's laugh, the way our family came together every holiday and filled this old house with music and love. Could I really wish all of that away? Would I truly erase everything just to undo one unthinkable truth? I don't think I could, because despite everything, James and I built something beautiful. Yes, was built on a truth we didn't know. Yes, became something tragic when we found out. But it was never fake. Our love was real. Our life was real. And in the end, that's what I choose to hold on to. I don't know how the world will judge me if this story ever comes to light. I don't know what my children would say, or my grandchildren, or strangers who hear this tale and gasp in disbelief. But I know what's in my heart. I know I loved. I know I tried. And I know I spent my life walking a path that I'd never asked for but never abandoned. James passed away last winter, peacefully, quietly. He was holding my hand. His final words were, "You were everything to me." And he was everything to me too. He still is. I sit in his old chair now, reading the books he never finished, listening to the music he used to hum while shaving. I miss him every single day. and I always will. But I'm not afraid anymore. Not of judgment, not of death, not of truth. Because the truth, as heavy as it is, has set me free. So now I leave this story in your hands, whoever you are. Not because I want pity, not because I want attention, but because maybe, just maybe, someone out there is carrying a secret too, or living a love that others wouldn't understand, or asking themselves if a mistake can still lead to something beautiful. If that's you, I see you. I've been you, and I want you to know. Even broken stories are worth telling, even painful. Truths deserve to be heard. Even forbidden love can leave behind something sacred. Asterisk if you've stayed with me through this story. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, please share your thoughts in the comments without judgment, just with compassion. If you've ever carried a secret or loved someone the world didn't approve of, you're not alone. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe that every story, no matter how dark or complicated, deserves to be told. And remember, love doesn't always follow the rules, but it always leaves a mark.